Hey there, I'm Alex Kidman, and this is the Motorola Edge 50 Neo, the lowest priced Edge phone in Motorola's lineup this year, but arguably one of the best. Let's get into the review. The Edge 50 Neo turned up on my test bench at exactly the same time as the Edge 50, and Edge 50 is a slightly more expensive phone, and that made me think at first glance, right, well, this is going to be a less compelling device, because that's usually how it goes. The entry-level model in a tier is usually the one that's got all the compromises, all the problems. It's not really the one you want to get. You want to be looking up towards those upper tiers, but that's actually not what's happened. Let's get into why that is. First of all, looking at the design. So while the other Edge phones tend to have curved displays, always a contentious matter, the Edge 50 Neo keeps it short and simple. It has a 6.4-inch POLED display that's totally flat. And I know some people do like a flat display. This has one. And at 6.4 inches, it's also nice to hold in the hand. It's a nice compact phone. And with so many phones tending towards those larger displays, and again, totally a taste thing, having a smaller phone option is no bad thing. Here in Australia, the Edge 50 Neo is available in 3 colour choices, and I have to apologise if I get the pronunciation of these entirely wrong, because it's quite possible. Poinciana, Grisaille, or Latte. Yeah, me neither. It turns out these are actually Pantone names for what are effectively red, grey, and tan, and it's the tan or latte version that Motorola sent me for review. There is also a nautical blue variant, but we're not seeing that in Australia for reasons of, well, I don't know actually. Maybe someone at Motorola Australia doesn't like me, because I really do like a blue phone myself. Maybe, though, that's to punish me, because I keep going on about how much I dislike vegan leather, and guess what these phones have? Yeah, vegan leather backs. Quick reminder, vegan leather is not leather in any way, shape or form. It's plastic. It's just a fancy name for softened plastic, but it's a plastic that I find really kind of ugh to the touch. And again, totally a subjective thing. You might be 100% fine with it. I am rather pleased to note, however, that Motorola does supply a case in the box. Now, this ain't much of a case, because once I clip it on, you'll be able to see it doesn't actually protect the sides of the phone at all, just the back, but it protects me from having to touch vegan leather, and for that, I am truly grateful. I'm also kind of grateful that there's a feature that's in the Edge 50 that's also in the Edge 50 Neo, and that's proper water resistance. So the Edge 50 Neo is IP68 rated. Now, that doesn't mean you should go scuba diving with it per se, but it does mean if it accidentally falls into water or it gets rained on or whatever, it should survive. On the control side, it's all fairly standard, simple stuff, just regular buttons down the right-hand side and an in-display fingerprint reader, which really hasn't given me any grief at all during my review period. On the camera front, as the lowest tier of the Edge family, I was ready for the compromises to come flying at me. But they didn't. Despite that $100 price gap between the Edge 50 Neo and the Edge 50, they've actually got the same camera array. So we're talking a 50 megapixel primary wide lens paired up with a 13 megapixel ultra wide lens and 10 megapixel 3x telephoto lens, plus a 32 megapixel selfie shutter at the front. Now, telephoto is pretty rare to see in the mid-range at all, especially 3x telephoto. So it's really pleasing to see it on a phone at this price point, although you do still have to temper your expectations because, look, 3x native zoom, yeah, that works pretty well. And Motorola pushes this quite a bit farther than they do for a lot of their other phones, because typically Motorola's kind of conservative on this front. But here they've opted to let you push it all the way up to 30x, and look, that just does not work well at all. 30x is not good on most phones, to be fair, but it's really particularly awful on the Edge 50 and on the Edge 50 Neo. And look, otherwise, this very much shoots as you might expect it to. So daytime shots are kind of table stakes for mid-range phones these days, and it does a good enough job on those. Lower light, it's reasonable without being spectacular. Fast action is still bit of a problem for phones at this price range. This is a capable enough shooter, not an entirely exciting one, with the exclusion of the fact that it's got that telephoto lens. I do appreciate having a bit of flexibility in play, and having an actual zoom lens does lend you that flexibility. On the performance front, one of the ways that Motorola gets the price down for the Edge 50 Neo is by using a MediaTek processor, specifically the Dimensity 7300. And comparably, the Edge 50, the $100 more model, has a Snapdragon 7 Gen 1. But it's kind of interesting seeing how those phones compare, as well as the phones that you can get at the time of writing in Australia for the same $699 price point as the Edge 50 Neo. So first of all, let's have a look at how it does in CPU terms using Geekbench 6's CPU test. The one upside to those results is that it is very close to the Edge 50 in performance terms, despite that $100 price point gap. But it's still not the strongest performer in this class, and that's a story that's very much emphasized when we look at GPU performance. Being last here isn't a great selling point for the Edge 50 Neo, though the reality of its use is that it's still decently responsive for a mid-range phone. Throw heavier duty Android apps at it, and you'll wait a little longer for them to load, but like just about every other mid-range phone out there, you're not likely to be hit with too much lag too much of the time. I've long been a fan of the way Motorola approaches Android. It's a fairly clean UI experience, save for things like the Moto Action. So if I chop twice, for example, the flashlight comes on. That kind of thing. But one thing that has perplexed me, or one thing that's annoyed me really, has been Motorola's commitment to Android OS upgrades, with most of their phones maybe getting a year or two of OS upgrades, maybe 2 to 3 years of security updates. And that's totally the story for the Motorola Edge 50, for example, but not the Edge 50 Neo. The Edge 50 Neo gets 5 years of OS upgrades and 5 years of security upgrades. And that's excellent. That's actually better than Samsung is doing at this kind of price point. It's basically unparalleled except for Google itself, if you can get a Pixel 8a dropping down to this price point. I've seen them a little further north of this, however. So, really good work there, Motorola. Keep it up. On the networks front, the Edge 50 Neo supports 5G, just sub 6. I wouldn't really expect anything else at this price point. And your network experience is always going to be a bit variable. Testing here in Sydney on the Telstra network, I usually expect to see between 200 to 400 meg down as peak, and that's pretty much exactly what I got out of the Edge 50 Neo. In terms of SIM support, you're talking single nano SIM plus eSIM. Always a nice inclusion to have if you're travelling. On the battery front, you might expect, because virtually every Android phone out there has it, that this would have a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, but no, it doesn't. I'm not even really sure why, because you don't, for example, have the thinness of those curved screens of some of the other Edge phones, but nonetheless, you're stuck with a 4,310 milliamp hour battery, bit below the curve there, and that does, I think, have an impact on its battery life. Now, battery life usage is always variable because it totally just depends on the apps you're using, how often you're using them, that kind of thing. And my standard test for this is a 1 hour YouTube battery test from a fully charged battery. If the phone drops below 90%, it's probably not going to last a day for most people, but every percentage point more than 90 is a good thing. Here's how the Edge 50 Neo compares in that test. And look, while that's not the best figure in the market, it's pretty solid considering that smaller battery in play, really. And that does play out in day-to-day usage. Look, all-day battery life should be achievable by most people unless you really hammer this phone. And if you hammer a phone, it goes flat. That's not news. On the charging front, it's also pleasing to note that this has Qi wireless charging. Now, wireless charging is slower, it's less efficient, but it's also much, much less common in $699 phones. However, if you want faster charging, you're going to want to use USB-C, and here you do still get a charger in the box, a really nice 68-watt charger at that. Nice to see, Motorola. Good job. So should you buy the Edge 50 Neo? Well, look, I came into this review thinking, oh, look, this is the really cheap one. It's probably going to be all kinds of compromised or really slow or have worse cameras or worse battery life. And most of those things just aren't true. Now, it's not the fastest in its category, but I think that balance of the camera quality, the battery life, the commitment to OS upgrades makes this a real contender. It's a really solid buy. It's certainly a better buy than the Edge 50, and I just did not expect to be saying that at all. Anyway, that's my take on the Motorola Edge 50 Neo. What do you think? Got any questions? Hit me up in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe.